Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the seminar series organized by the Empathic Computing Laboratory. I'm your host, Aladdin, and our guest speaker for today is Stephan Lukosch, who is currently a professor at HitLab New Zealand at University of Canterbury in Christchurch. Before that, he did a lot of research in Netherlands and in Germany. His research interest is in evaluating human factor and acceptance, engagement, and experience of human augmentation. He has done a lot of research since 1999, if that's correct.
Yeah.
And the title of his talk today is Engaging Human Augmentation. The talk will be roughly about an hour, followed by brief questions and answers. Thank you, Stefan, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. We'll start sharing my screen. That should be this one. So, yeah. Does it work? Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work. This talk mainly will be a summary of basically everything I've done over the last almost 12 years, evaluating the use of augmented reality in applied settings and seeing and how far this technology can be used to engage people in different scenarios. And as an introduction, I always like to do that in a lecture room because then I would actually see how many people have really read those books. But part of my work is really influenced and motivated by those books. So if you think about Ender's Game is about, I won't do too many spoilers, but if you think about Ender in this book, they are playing a game and he's really engaged in the game. There's a lot of immersive technology around. And at some point in time, they discover something that they should not have discovered, I think, because the game was more real than they thought. But there was a huge engagement of the characters in using the technology and the games. And if you look at the second book here, that's Otherland by Ted Williams. I think everyone who's doing research on virtual reality should definitely read it. But this is about creating, a virtual environment in which you basically become immortal. And that's a book, I think about 4 books, 3 books, pretty thick, but it's a really nice story that unravels while you read it, and you can really understand why people like to immerse themselves in these kind of environments. And then there's a book by Werner Winch, Rainbow's End. And I think, that book draws a pretty bleak picture of what augmented reality could entail for us in the future. It's about a professor, initially a literature professor, that has Alzheimer and he's cured by a magical pill, kind of. And then he comes back and is more a nerd, technology nerd, but he moves around in the city and discovers that everything, since he basically fell asleep with his Alzheimer disease, turned really dull and gray. And then he discovers that everyone is wearing contact lenses and overlays reality with what they like to see. And there's a lot of engagement of the people with the technology as well. So in the books, people seem to know how to develop technology that engages people and makes them really engaged and motivated to use the technology. So you see faces like Ender in this game movie, but you never really know what actually is the element in these systems that makes these people engaged. Is it the story? Is it the technology? Is it the way the technology works? And I'm really interested into developing technology and understanding how you can engage people in the use of in using the technology. So if I say human augmentation, that's for me, I'm following Jun Rekimoto in there. That's for me something like augmented humans. So it's basically a shift from human computer interaction towards human computer integration, so that we can basically use human interface technology to enhance and create new experience, to foster engagement, to help us in difficult situations. And if you think about, let's say, perfect augmented humans, or where technology really works perfectly, you always, you can easily look at Hollywood movies and series. One of the, I think, closest human computer integration that I've seen in movies so far is within Iron Man. And if you look at the interface and how you can interact with JAWS, that's pretty impressive. I think we are still far away from that, but it would be nice to be able to understand how you can design and work towards that direction. And as I'm a bit older, I watched Lee Majors in The $6 Million Man. That was one of my favorite TV shows when I was younger. And he basically, he was an army soldier, and they used at that point in time 6 million to enhance his body. So he got superpowers, super vision, super hearing aids, these kind of things, and he was going on difficult tasks then. But he used basically technology to amplify existing or create new human skills and capabilities. And this is what I consider as human augmentation when I will talk about it in the next hour. Yeah, so engagement. I think we all use this term engagement quite often the moment we talk about interactive systems, but it never really has been defined clearly. So if people say like, oh, I'm engaged, what do you first think about? It's very difficult. And if you think about interactive systems, Benyon and colleagues in 2005, they said like, yeah, an engaging system should be accessible, usable, and acceptable. But what does it actually mean? In 2018, and there was a paper by Kayali and they said like, oh, engagement is the desire and willingness to stick to a game. So they looked specifically at games, and they thought that engagement is the lowest level of involvement towards immersion. So they were more thinking from a technology perspective. So there's something beyond, let's say, engagement, and that's what they called immersion. Brown and Cairns in 2004, again, looking at barriers to engagement and do you need to overcome to engage people? They said like, oh, you need to think about the accessibility again. So we have this with Benyon et al. You need to think about the controls that you can use. And you need to definitely look at how much time people are willing to invest. So if people are willing to invest a lot of time because there's no barriers with regard to controls and the stories in the game, then people start to get engaged. A colleague of mine in the Netherlands, Meinert IJsselstein, and a lot of people in his group thought and had run a project on engaging experiences. And they also came up with a questionnaire that is heavily discussed at the moment because apparently it was never really fully validated. But they looked at different aspects that contribute to engagement, like immersion, tension, competence, flow, negative and positive effect, challenge. So a lot of people talk about engagement, but it seems to be really difficult to understand what engagement really is and how to evaluate it. And if you just look at those terms here on this slide and just pick out flow, which is a psychological concept that also is very often used in relation to engagement, there's basically 9 different elements that contribute to engagement. So there's feasibility, concentration, goals, feedback, involvement, control, loss of self-consciousness, transformation of time, autotelic experience. So, and that's just flow, and that's just one part of engagement. So engagement is a really huge concept, which is nice. It gives you a lot of opportunity to think about it and to do research. Looking at flow, what I always liked a lot, and it's very nice to explain, is like, I assume that we have some people in the audience that play computer games. And if you think about transformation of time, I think it's one of the strongest attributes or elements of flow. It's basically you start playing a game, and let's say at 10 p.m., and then you start playing and playing and playing, and suddenly you look at the watch again, and it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, and you say like, what? It just started. And that's basically the transformation of time. And the question is, how can you create systems or design systems that make you feel these kind of engagement or this kind of flow? For now, I say for now because I'm working with a group back in the Netherlands still on a better model for engagement. But for now, I'm using this one, which is a system from 2000 or model from 2008, and pretty briefly describes what engagement is actually about. So the simple model is like you look at a system at some point in time. There's a point of engagement where you decide like, oh yeah, I need to use a system to do whatever. And then over time, you engage with the system, you use it, sometimes you use it more, you use it less, could also be a game. And at some point in time, you disengage. the system because you're done, you don't need it anymore, or because one of those attributes down here on the lower part of the slide basically make you feel like I don't want to use the system anymore. Um, so if you think, for example, about a game, if you play a game for a really long time, at some point in time, you will have solved all challenges and you won't feel challenged about the game anymore. And that will also, or it is too difficult to play the game, so it will have a negative effect. That might um, make you decide to disengage. But then over time, you might consider the game again and look at the game again and try it again. And you might have become better at playing games, for example. So you re-engage and you start playing again and you might play it for a longer time. So what is interesting here is like you start to use a system, you're engaged, you become disengaged. But here, all these attributes basically contribute to your engagement. And I'm pretty sure this list is not complete. What I tried to do over the last years is try to understand which of these attributes really contribute to engagement and what are the, yeah, which of those attributes has the biggest influence on engagement. So what I will do now in the next, over the next slides is basically talk about different domains in which I've done projects on human augmentation. And I will also discuss on how I evaluated that. I will discuss several different techniques to evaluate it. It might go a bit too much into detail, so you might also already know all these evaluation techniques. So in order to make that an interactive lecture, I don't know whether we can do that. If you would like me to talk a bit about more, or would have some questions, well, feel free to ask them already while I'm talking about that. So in the health domain, I started a project that was around, need to think, 2000, I need to think a bit more. I think 2015, we started a project called Technology in Motion. And I was in the Netherlands. I worked together with the Department of Neurology of a university clinic in Leiden. And the idea was like to think about how we could assess the upper body motor function of Parkinson, Alzheimer, and stroke patients in a better and in more engaging way. So it's not that there are no clinical standards on how to assess the motor function, but they are very boring. Patients very often feel like in an examination situation, they feel stressed. And based on that, or due to that, actually, they do not really show normal motor function behavior. So because they're stressed, they might have more of a tremor, or they might not reach out as far as they actually could. So we teamed up and we thought like, oh, couldn't we think about couldn't we use games that engage people in their, let's say, motor function assessment? So what we did is think about augmented reality games, and you might say like, oh, why augmented reality in that case, and not virtual reality, because it could create way more immersion using virtual reality. That was mainly because the patient group was, let's say, 50 to 60 years old and older. They already had some kind of dysfunction, and we wanted to make sure that while they are immersed and are playing the game, that they are still connected to the real world. So that's why we chose for augmented reality instead of a more immersive technology. What we also did, we did a very iterative patient-centered design of augmented reality games. And the next slide will show a movie, and I will talk a bit about what you can see there. So, but we in fact had, in the first iteration, we developed a game called Post Office Trouble, which basically was about, as the storyline was like, oh, somewhere in the post office messed up all parcels. The moment you play the game, you will see parcels in front of you. You will see pictures on the parcels, and then you will have to grab those parcels and move them to the destination box. So you might see something like the Eiffel Tower, and then you needed to move it to the destination box, France. After playing the game, we learned a bit like, oh, it might be good to give a bit more guidance to the patients, and we looked into haptic feedback. So we developed a controller with gyrochroma. We tried to look at different motions. So The first two games were more about like grabbing something in midair and moving it. Gyrochroma was more like tapping and pinching motions. And based on what we have learned in these three game iterations, which were all postgraduate student projects, we developed a series of games, Melody, Cubes, Hanging Swirl, and Balloons, that were based on the experiences here. So let's see. So I will not show the whole movie because it's way too long. And I think audio is also not that important. So at least you can hear me talking it. So here you can see one of the patients playing one of the first games, Post Office Trouble. And that's a student actually showing how it worked. So you see this box, he was grabbing the box and then he moved it along. And as you can see, technology back then was a bit more simple still. So that's an Epson Moverio BT200, I think, with an Intel RealSense sensor for hint tracking. So a lot of things that we experienced were also a low usability that we experienced back at that point and was mainly due to technologies. So here we are using a more sophisticated head-mounted display, which was built by a Dutch company, had a really high resolution, very sharp, clear display. We still used the Intel RealSense for hand tracking, but as this model was not really precise, we always also showed the hand model so that patients knew what the computer thought where your hand is. So we actually compared it once, but it was not really worthwhile doing it. So moving along, another game that we then developed was this one, Candy Factory. So players here had a controller in their hand, and in augmented reality, the controller was exchanged with a small basket, and you saw conveyor belts. And then you had to move the basket around to the conveyor belt that was about to drop the candy, and then you had to collect the candy. Playing the game, we could basically assess the motion space or the reaching space of the patients, which was one of the criteria that the clinicians would like to know. So the game continues. That is the one on Gyrochroma. So here you basically were coloring your own ball with pinching motions and tapping motions on the table. And then you could grab the ball and throw it somewhere where it then exploded in a splash. A really small mini game that was mainly for developed to measure and see whether we can measure other movements. And that's the final iteration. I assume you all know that what you can see here in black would normally be the reality. So that's basically just the unity capture that you can see here. So that's the game Balloon Balloons. And here, that was a very simple game to calibrate all future games. So you are basically seeing this yellow beam, and then you had to follow it, and then to try to reach as far as you could up to the balloon and pinch it, and then the balloon exploded. What we did here is basically to see how well people could move, and that once we knew their reaching space, we could place all these games afterwards into that reaching space so that we could challenge patients to their limit. So what you can see, so that's a patient playing that. This is a second game, Melody Cubes. The idea here was that you had to grab those cubes and move them to the scaffold. Every time you moved a cube into the right scaffold, you heard a part of a melody, and then in the end, when you completed the task, you heard an old Dutch children's song, which was, for the patient, was really nice, and they appreciated it, and they were really motivated to finish it in the end. And the final game, the Hungry Squirrel one, the idea here is that you see walnuts all around and that there's a basket, and you have to grab the walnuts and place them into the basket. And every now and then, a squirrel appeared and tried to steal the walnut from you. And you had to, and patients had to move around the squirrel to drop the walnut into the basket. So overall, you would say like, oh, very simple games. Did it really work? Yeah, so what I can say, over all these games, we evaluated usability using the SUS scale. And I already said, like in the beginning, it was rather tricky using the first system we had with the Epson Moverio and the Intel RealSense, but over time, We changed the system working together with the patient so that they got better feedback, that our tracking got better. So the last system that you saw, that's the last series of the games, they were reasonably evaluated. So they definitely had a value above 68, which kind of indicates that the system is usable. Looking at engagement, I think personally that's really important to always evaluate usability, because you never know whether a system is usable enough to not have an adverse effect on engagement. So that's why this is important. We also use the game experience questionnaire to understand how the experienced patients have playing the game. Um, I don't know whether you know about the controversial discussion about the game experience questionnaire, which is also called the GEQ. A lot of people used it because it feels, looking at it, it feels just like what you need to evaluate the game experience. There's a core questionnaire, there's a social presence module, there's a post-game module. Um, but in fact, and we always use the post-game module. No, we use the core questionnaire post-game, and it evaluates basically how you feel about competence, how immersed you were, how much you experience flow, tension, challenge. It also looked at positive and negative effect, and it gave us insights on the game experience. Apparently, this questionnaire was heavily used, but not always well cited and not really well used. And in fact, it was not really clearly validated. And there was a paper in 2018 by Effie Law and colleagues, and they looked at the questionnaires and basically come to the conclusion that the results are not really significant. So you need to be careful using it. I would still not advise you against using it, because it still can provide you quite some insights on the experience players have. And we were quite happy using it. I would just say, be aware of the discussion and be careful the moment you use it. Our results mainly on using those games in the health domain were that, like, all the augmented reality games that we had potential for assessing motor impairments. However, in the beginning, usability was an issue, and in the end, validation of the games for medical purpose was an issue, and is still ongoing. So we could see that patients that were using the games were really engaged. An example might be playing the 3 games in a row would have normally taken you, let's say, as a healthy person, about 20 minutes, possibly. But we had patients playing the games. So we really run studies with Parkinson, Alzheimer, and stroke patients and compared them against each other, and looked at how far it helps us to match the motor assessment that is done in the clinical trial or in the clinical test. Some of the patients took about 2 hours playing it, and they really wanted to finish it. So they were really committed, they were engaged, and they saw, like, yeah, now that I'm here, I can contribute possibly to a better method of assessing motor dysfunction. They kept playing it. And if you have used augmented reality and have seen these games, you really know how difficult it is to have your hands up in midair and to interact with objects. So it's really tiring. But still, patients did it. What was important for us is, like, if you really want to use it in the clinic, though, you need to improve the accuracy of the measurements. So using the intrareal sense is not really the most stable way for clinical assessment. So some work needs to be done there. And also back then, using the tracking that we used, augmented reality was not that precise, and that led to some glitches. That also then led to some glitches in the movement. So we could see that in the real world, movements were more directed towards an object, whereas in augmented reality, patients every now and then really moved around and had to search the object. And that was mainly to the technology back then that we used. But in the end, it really showed potential. Okay. In fact, before I started working in the health domain, my major focus on my major projects were all in the safety and security domain. And Oh, this one might be nice to watch with sound actually. Does it have? So the first project that started actually just after I moved to Delft in the Netherlands in 2008. I think the project started in 2009. Was together with the Netherlands Forensic Institute. Yeah, it's kind of ancient. Still, I think the insights that we got there were really interesting, and they're still valid. So I'd like to talk about it still. And this is basically the promotional video. Let me see. Can you actually hear that, or do I need to share my computer audio here? Let's see.
We can't hear anything right now, but the video's not
you
playing.
can hear it? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Crime scene investigation stands on the eve of a revolution. New innovations will soon come to the crime scene. Our work will be more efficient, easier, and even more reliable. CSI The Hague presents The Future of Forensic Investigation. Under the guidance of the Netherlands.
Okay, let me move forward a bit. So the idea here in this project was
Back to the crime scene. The police asked
that currently, or back in the days, and I think that's still practice, the first person at the crime scene is normally not this person in this white suit. But the evidence on a crime scene is best the moment the crime scene is discovered. So the sooner you can, let's say, secure evidence at the crime scene, the better. So the idea here was in this project, and the movie is not showing that, but the idea was like giving support to the first persons at the crime scene to secure evidence, not necessarily to collect evidence, but to secure it. So that somebody like an expert from the Forensic Institute could basically join a police agent on a crime scene and tell this police agent what needs to be secured or collected and how it could be done. So it's basically the idea or the dream of augmented reality of bringing remote expertise to another place to help someone at that location in the task or job. Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, I'm being called while I'm on a presentation. I will decline that. And what we did in this project is then develop an augmented reality system that basically could connect to a remote person, and this remote person could then help analyzing the crime scene. Yeah. So I think I talked about that already. So major idea was like bringing skills to the crime scene using virtual co-location to provide the necessary expertise. The interesting part here is this was our head-mounted display back in 2009. That's a card-size cinemizer. I'm not sure whether that ever made it to the market, but it was basically a 3D head-mounted display with for watching movies in 3D. I would say that was the idea. We added 2 webcams up front that we used for revised SLAM algorithm, a stereo SLAM actually that we developed in order to scan the environment to allow for registration of virtual objects at the crime scene. Yes. So this is basically a bit like how the system looked like, and you could, well, these green points, we didn't show that to the police agents on the scene, but that was basically a testing mode, and then you could set restricted area ribbons and poles to secure an area. So the idea was that other people that would enter the crime scene then would also use those glasses, and they would see which areas they should not go to or where they shouldn't touch anything until the expert that can actually collect the evidence is around. Yeah. So we ran back then also an experiment with real forensic investigators and police agents to really understand what is the impact of the technology on their working practices. And we were mainly interested in the collaboration quality among the person on the crime scene and the expert at the remote place. And it was pretty difficult to evaluate. So how do you really evaluate collaboration quality? And we decided in the end to use a qualitative approach to that, which is called the multidimensional method to evaluate the quality of collaboration that was designed by Burkhardt and colleagues. And this method in the end evaluates collaboration with regard to fluidity of collaboration, the mutual understanding, how people that work together can solve the problem, how they discuss and argue with each other to reach consensus, how they manage the time, whether there's a cooperative orientation or whether there's a disbalance in their interaction, and how is the individual task orientation. So all these dimensions actually tell you something about the way they collaborate. And what happens here is, because I'm saying like it's a qualitative approach, you basically have experts who judge each of these dimensions on a 5-grade Likert scale, and they do that in what they do as well is they answer questions with a positive and negative balance that are designed for the specific situation, in our case, crime scene investigation. So example, for the third dimension, we used something like, do the investigators improve the spatial analysis by having their shared ideas available? Or it's a positive one, or is there miscommunication because refinement during the analysis takes place and is pooled? So how well do they really exchange information while working together? And we learned a lot, in fact. So interestingly, if you work with the safety security domain, the first question that we got is like, what is the protocol of working together? So they were expecting that all is regulated, and we said like, no, just go ahead. And that was rather fluid how they work together. Also with regard to mutual understanding, having an expert remotely that can see what you see at the crime scene, they basically said that, oh, this visual representation really helps us to understand each other. So that was good. Information exchange was very, let's say, problem-oriented and very picture-oriented, or used, let's say, landmarks in the environment. So like, look behind the table, don't cross the ribbon. There was, the system was helpful in arguing each other. Task and time management was good. And then people could really work nicely together. So in fact, we could see that working together via this system was possible, and it was possible to collaboratively analyze the crime scene. However, oh, I think I miss a slide here, because this sounds now like, well, perfect, we found the perfect solution for analyzing a crime scene remotely. I seem to have omitted the slide that talks a bit of the drawbacks of the system. So first of all, because we used this head-mounted display, the field of view was really low or small. So it was, I don't know, I think it was about 20 degrees, something like that. The resolution in this head-mounted display was like 7020p, whatever. Tracking was not really stable. We used freehand interaction that was sometimes not working that well. So it was, in some sense, it was surprising that we got this good feedback on the way they could collaborate. And the most interesting thing that we learned here was like, there were a lot of discussions about the presence of the remote person at the local scene. So the local agents, they felt a bit like remote controlled, and they were having trust issues. So like, I get an advice from a remote person that I might not know to collect evidence at the crime scene. So what, for example, what would happen if I destroy the evidence? Whose fault would it be? So this, who's responsible? These kind of discussions were there. There were a lot of discussion on presence, and there were a lot of discussion also on awareness of each other's actions. and how far the actions each other performs really helps to move forward to finish a task or accomplish a task. Still, the Dutch police and the Forensic Institute, they were really impressed with this project. So we had a follow-up project which started around 2014, where we took the whole idea of virtual co-location a step further. And it was the idea to really explore how augmented reality can be used to help inter and intra-organizational situational awareness. So we designed different scenarios. One of the scenarios is, for example, was on a drug lab that would be discovered. And normally, if a drug lab is discovered, the police gets a call, the police goes to the crime scene, the police checks the location. If there's a drug lab, they might call the fire department. The fire department comes to the crime scene in order to check for dangerous substances. And just at the end of this chain, the forensic investigators come to the crime scene to collect the evidence and secure the evidence. But then already the police and the fire department have gone through this crime scene, and some of the evidence might have been destroyed, some of the evidence might have been moved. So for forensic investigators, it might be really difficult to understand what has happened at the crime scene and to really decide what is an evidence and how to collect that evidence. So we thought we explore what happens if the police, the fire department, and the forensic investigators would use an augmented reality system at the crime scene and basically document what they do, all the time connected to a remote expert that helps you doing what you need to do. So basically, same idea. And we used a different setup. There was a big laptop at the back of this police agent, and the head-mounted display here is a Meta 1, if you happen to know that. And what we did in the experiment is basically we compared using this augmented reality setup to the standard methods of investigation. And we did that at a so-called crime scene investigation lab in the Netherlands, where they could basically stage crime scenes. So it's within a building. They rebuilt a typical Dutch apartment and the street scene. And this is where we ran these experiments. So in this movie, you should see. So the scenario was called Ecstasy Lab. It was really well staged, not using real drugs, I need to say, but it was interesting to see that. It felt like, well, I have never seen one, but it felt like it could look like an ecstasy lab, at least for me. It smelled also like a chemical lab. So that was, with regard to the setup of the scene, that was really good. And then we had police agents basically without augmented reality support arriving at the scene, doing whatever they do. So back then they very often used mobile phones to take pictures. And then the moment, let's say, the fire department would arrive, they would briefly meet outside of the apartment, show some pictures and say like, look, this is what I've done. This is what we have discovered. And then we did the same experiment using augmented reality. So the police agent get the call, they arrive at the scene here. Somebody opens the door. The police agent in augmented reality gets now information about this person, gets information about why they have been called to the scene. He can look up some more information, can annotate things, and then they will basically enter the scene and leave annotations on what they see in augmented reality. And move a bit along. So this is basically the remote interface. Interestingly, I don't yet know whether you can see the cursor, but this gray area here in the middle indicates the field of view of the local agent. So only if something in this gray field, or no, if there's an augmented reality object like this red ball would be in this gray field, the local agent would see that as well. So I think by now technology has improved a lot, so it will be better. But that was also one of the issues that we had to deal with. So we indicated that, and it helped communicating with each other. But anyways, so the remote person and the local person, they could all annotate the scene. And over time, let's say, so that's a remote person in a room, different persons here. Over time, this whole crime scene was annotated. So here you can see some symbols that the fire department has put down to indicate how dangerous a substance might be. And that helped then later on the Forensic Institute or investigators to decide on how they would basically collect the evidence or whether they need additional help or a specialist collecting the evidence. So when we ran that experiment, we were lucky enough to have quite a few participants. And it was really about understanding the situational awareness at the scene for the remote person, the local person, and the whole system. So whether people at the scene would know what to do, and that is based on situational awareness. If you want to evaluate situational awareness, there are different techniques that can be used. Self-rating techniques, freeze probe, real-time probe, observer rating. We in the end decided to use self-rating techniques, though everyone basically says that freeze probe techniques give you a better insight in situational awareness. The problem about freeze probe is that you have people running through a scenario, and then at a certain point in there, you need to say like, oh, everyone stop. I have about 5 questions. Please tell me what you know. And then you would say like, get the answers and then could calculate the situational awareness score. If the scenario itself is very important, you would like to know how that works out, well, then it's better to use a self-rating technique. And we use the so-called SART technique, situational awareness rating technique, that evaluates situational awareness on 10 dimensions. And then you can calculate a score. And it's administered post-trial, so on a 7-point Likert scale. And then you can calculate the summed understanding, the attentional demand, and the attentional supply. And all together, this gives you a situational awareness score. And just because I think I'm talking way too long, that's just for completeness, because in fact, there's a glitch in academic publishing. So if you Google the SART questionnaire, you will find one, and the first picture you find just shows 10 dimensions, and it will not include, I think, the information quality. So just for completeness, if you ever want to evaluate situational awareness, please use these 10 dimensions with these questions, and you should be fine. What we also evaluated is TLX. So I think most of you will know TLX, because we wanted to know, like, if you use augmented reality, does the workload go up or does the workload go down, or does it stay the same? Back then we used NASA TLX. Apparently there's now a newer one, which I would recommend using if you would like to know workload using immersive technologies. There's a new validated questionnaire or method called SimTLX. That is basically like the NASA TLX on the dimensions mental demands, physical demands, and temporal demands, but also includes some more dimensions like distraction, perceptual frame, task control, in order to acknowledge the fact that you're using an immersive technology. So what we learned, though, in this project is that the team situation awareness was increased with augmented reality. So all the teams said like, oh, we finally understand what people have done on the scene. It really helps us to take our decisions. So we could come up with design recommendation that augmented reality can be really used to create a shared visual space between local and remote, and that this shared visual space helps to work together in the end. One issue that we still had was that the remote experts were not really, they were considered as really helpful, especially when it was about the identifying how dangerous a substance was and these kind of things, or taking a decision on what kind of evidence to mark up and select. Still, we had a lot of presence issues. So still, local people failed, remote controls, and there were these trust issues. But this is what I wanted to say about safety and security domain. And a bit more to more recent things and things that I'm interested in right now, because I think here engagement plays a really huge role. So I'm looking into using immersive technologies in sports, and I started doing that with some Japanese colleagues I think around 2017. One of the leading figures in there was Masahiko Inami, and I met him at the ISMAR conference in Fukuoka in Japan. He was a keynote speaker then. We had dinner together, and we talked together, and he said, like, I'm really interested in using human augmentation in order to make sports more interesting, or to create new sports. And back then, I need to say, we had the idea that we could run a superhuman sports event next to the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen for various reasons. Even without the pandemic, I think it wouldn't have happened because interests have changed. But still, I'm very intrigued on the idea of using immersive technologies in sports in order to, let's say, augment senses, augment the body, or augment the playing field in order to create new engaging experiences. What we did, in fact, is we ran one design competition on superhuman sports in 2018 in Delft, and we had about 10 or 11 teams from all over the world coming to Delft and showcasing superhuman sports that they have designed, and everyone could try them out. And basically, on what we've seen on that design competition, we said, like, yeah, well, you can use technology to augment the senses in sport. You can use technology to augment the body in sport, or you can use it if you predominantly focus on the visual impact or possibilities of augmented reality. You can use it to augment the playing field. So we had different examples. For example, for augmenting the senses, there were sorry, need to drink something. So there were ideas about using technology to give people a spider sense, like Spider-Man, so that you can detect that one of your co-players is in danger. You could create something like a new sense, the X-ray vision, or something like clairvoyance. We had examples, though, where people played with thermal feedback and sensory substitution. So you basically, there was one game where you had to close your eyes. And the moment you closed your eyes, that was detected, and you could use your hand wearing a glove to basically feel heat. And that basically gave you the idea where you could collect elements for the game that you were playing. We also had a variation of dodgeball. It seems that, well, in fact, we had about 4 variations of dodgeball during that event. So a lot of people seem to have chosen dodgeball because it's something that you play at school, and it's really a nice example of where you can use augmentation. And this one was basically giving you feedback on how often you were hit, and yeah, and you could basically use those gloves to collect some power-ups, these kind of things. I don't remember very well on that one. So this is, oh yeah, actually this is Dubhead. That's the system where you have to close the eyes and where you got the thermal feedback and to enhance in the gameplay. Another example not shown at the competition back then was would be super leaping, where you basically get the idea that you would jump really far and you would use drones to provide you with a simple lift, and then your sense of jumping would be enhanced. For augmenting the body, one example that we had there was called muscle blazer. It was basically like laser tagging, but this PGM-induced force feedback in the vest, basically the moment you were hit, these vests were hampering your movements, and sooner or later you couldn't move at all. So you basically could really feel the impact of being hit and shot. Well, not the shot, but what it means to be shot, so you would get slower. And for augmenting the body, other examples, well, might be like the Meta arms. I don't know whether you have ever used them. At Zicraft Asia, they were in the exhibition last year. That was really nice. You could use them for the first time. The Japanese colleagues designed it basically with the idea to give you an extra pair of hands that you can control with your feet. So you could carry more. For example, if you carry a really heavy load, it could help you to open a door. Also, Japanese colleagues came up with something like the anthropomorphic tail for giving players in games the experience of wearing a tail. So it could either help you to keep your balance, or it could be used to get you off balance. So there's various ways of augmenting the body and augmenting the experience around sports. Um, for augmenting the playing field, the interesting part here is, well, you can really create completely new games. You can challenge the physics, you can add new equipment, you can add new opponents that would normally not be there. You could play with remote people that are not there, or you could train in a safe environment. And what you can see here was a prototype that group showed on climbing, and it was in the end the winner of the design competition because they really created an incredible experience. So you could climb on the wall and you had to walk over the plank to the wall. And it was first designed for training or helping people with fear of heights while climbing. But it was also a very interesting sport because it could allow you to go anywhere in the world and experience climbing there. That was really good. And though this one here is limited in height, I think it was 3 to 3.5 meters, the group later created a prototype of a climbing treadmill. And I was lucky enough to test it in Düsseldorf in Germany, where this group is placed. And on this treadmill, I was climbing for about 20 minutes. And I really, while being exerted climbing on this treadmill in that technology, I really got the idea that I was high up somewhere in the mountains and I had to press a button in the end to say like, okay, help me, I want to stop. So then when I pressed this button, an elevator appeared and brought me down to the safe floor. So that was really good. In fact, I think, or the biggest benefit here of augmenting the playing field is that you can really train in a safe environment and that you can make sports more interesting and enjoyable. And I basically, in order to finish what I'm talking about, I want to like to give some technology issue. Bear with me a second. Examples of what students have designed back in Delft. So if you are a runner and you're a highly motivated runner, you wouldn't need what you will see right now. But if you are someone who likes to be motivated by others to run and would like to run or make run a bit more fun, that might be really a nice prototype or a design idea. And the student that designed this, and I need to say it's a design mock-up, so it was never really developed. I had the idea like, I really like running, but I don't like running alone. And running over time gets really boring. So she came up with Play Your Run. And I will skim a bit through the movie, but it's in fact something like a combination of running and Mario Kart.
Find me a running partner. Hi, I'm Superwoman.
Hi, good luck.
So what you can see here that they are not in the same place. They are running against each other. The idea was that you still could see your opponent virtually in front of you, but you were not running or not competing, let's say, on time and speed. So she basically made everything of that while you were competing on distance, but it was a virtual distance in the end. So you could find power-ups that put you 1 kilometer ahead. You could use power-ups to slow down your opponent, like, well, you will know that from Mario Kart. And you could also find power-ups that gave tasks to you, and then you had to run in a certain way to gain speed, for example. But in the end, well, let's go here. You will have to finish. Let's see who wins.
Keep race.
Gotcha.
So, though this was only a design prototype, the student did experiments in a sports hall or in a gym where she basically placed balloons as a power-up items that you could collect, and where she used projectors to project patterns on the floor, and basically mimicked a bit what she has done here with students in a sports hall. What she learned there, that basically by gamifying the running activities, they were running more than they would normally do, and that they found running a bit more interesting. So it was an interesting start back in 2017 to think about how immersive technology can really increase your engagement in doing sport, in being active. Another example, and I think that's the final one, was a leak of lasers, again by students developed in Delft. And the idea here was that you basically play a 3D version of Pong against each other in or while using augmented reality. And it was developed using the Microsoft HoloLens. And the basic idea is like you see a laser beam, and in front of your HoloLens you have a mirror, and you need to move around to reflect the beam in such a way that it ends up in the goal of your opponent. And so this is a really simple idea. It was really engaging. When we showed that at the design competition, I was really scared that we wouldn't have HoloLenses afterwards, because people were running around like crazy in order to reflect the beam and yeah, actually win. What was interesting here as well, the students, because it's always a bit weird to see people interacting in augmented reality and nobody knows what's going on. They also created a view for the audience, and that's what you see all the time in between. So the audience could basically see players running around, but they could also see what's happening on the field without using a HoloLens as well. Again, all of the experiences that we had here, we evaluated it using the user experience questionnaire in comparison to the SUS questionnaire that I talked about in the beginning. The user experience questionnaire is more interesting because it gives you more insight in really the experience and the usability of the system. So it talks about attractiveness, perspicuity, efficiency, dependability, the stimulation. So it's really fun to use, something that I really would like to know at the moment. I would like to create an engaging experience. Yeah, it's recorded anyway, so I keep that here for completeness. But the use of that questionnaire is described on the website. It's validated, and there's tools for calculating the scores, so I can really recommend looking into it. And we also used the game engagement questionnaire, which is compared to the game experience questionnaire. This one is really validated, and that evaluates engagement as a level of involvement, but does not look really a lot into the time issues, though it mentions flow here. It's more looking at presence and immersion. Still, it was also interesting to use. And finally, we also used the flow short scale, which is a nice way to understand if the player participant is in a situation of flow and is really engaged with the system that you have designed. Using those questionnaires, we basically learned that augmenting senses, body or playing field encourages physical activity. It allows for new sports experiences, and in general was conceived as engaging. The question that we have is like, or that we couldn't answer in the short studies, is whether it's engaging because it's new, or whether it would be a long-term engagement. So would people that, for example, play League of Lasers over several years, or is it just interesting to play it once at an exhibition? Due to the limitations of technology, there's always crazy ideas on what you can do, but what we learned is like, the simpler you keep the mechanics and in the game, the better is the experience. And what is really important is to think about fostering audience participation so that people can see what they're doing, or possibly they could even participate in the game using the technology. So to conclude, 3 domains in which I looked at engagement. In the health domain, we learned that games are suitable for motor assessment, and that whatever you do, it needs to be adaptive to be meaningful. The safety security domain, we learned that augmentation really helps improve situational awareness, but it increases task load. It changes all the work processes. So people ask for like, what is the protocol and these kind of things, but they also ask like, oh, if I'm wearing this head-mounted display, I'm distracted and possibly cannot do the tasks that I normally need to do. So perhaps we need to have one expert using augmented reality on the scene while others do the standard things. In sports, we learned that human augmentation encourages physical activity. And looking back at the engagement model that I showed in the beginning, there are quite a lot of attributes. And for us, usability, game experience, game engagement, user experience, TLX, and flow were most insightful because they really allowed us to understand how people are engaged. What is missing, and that's definitely future work, a part of a lot of other things that I'm not working on. I'm hoping for better displays. I'm hoping for lighter equipment. I'm hoping for better real-time tracking in 3D. What I'm interested in is thinking about multimodal interaction. So how can I use multimodal interaction to make the interaction more intuitive and more engaging? And for that, I'm still working on a model for engagement, and I'm working on defining methods for assessing engagement. And this model that is hopefully to come out sooner or later. Well, at least we are in the second, in the first revision round, so possibly it should happen this year. Will be based on the insights that we got from analyzing and evaluating the attributes I was talking about today. And ultimately, I would like to identify design guidelines for human augmentation using that model so that it can help future designers to create engaging experiences. Okay, that was my last slide. Thank you for paying attention. And I think I will stop screen sharing now and hope that we can have a discussion on what I've talked about.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephan. That was really good talk and insights into engagement and state of flow and in 3 different domains, so the health and safety and sport. So well done. Thank you. I have anyone from the audience has a question, please feel free to either ask, raise a hand, or unmute yourself. For now, I have a quick question, just asking, since you mentioned about the re-engagement, was there in any of the user study that you used or the evaluations, is there a way to evaluate re-engagement?
No. Now, honestly speaking, I think this is the most challenging task of evaluating engagement, is that it is a long-term thing. So normally, if you're engaged with a system, like if you look at sports people, at some point in time in your life, you decide to do a sport.
Mm.
And very often, if you like the sport, you stick with the sport over your lifetime. There might be health issues that make you stop doing the sport, but if not, people tend to stick with it. If I look at my life, I played a lot of football. Then I stopped playing it for whatever reason, because I didn't like the coach. And then I started playing it again. And I would still like to play, but I can't because I have some knee issues. So, but what was the reason for re-engagement was basically like, one of the attributes that made me not play football, the coach changed. So just started again. And I'm not really aware on how you would evaluate re-engagement. And if you look at interactive systems, I think there's some research around games, and the model that we are preparing for engagement is also about games in general, applied games. But there's not really a way to evaluate, because it really requires to do a long-term study. So I'm not aware of any. But it might be interesting if you have a long-term position and you have a game where you know that people will play it and they might stop playing it. So there's research on why people stop playing. And that's also in the model that I showed. And that's very often about low usability, difficulty to control the system, too harsh challenges, so too difficult opponents in a game that make you basically stop and not play the game because you have the feeling that you will never advance how long you would play anyway. And there's some insight that sooner or later people will try again. And if they then manage to defeat the end boss, they keep playing until they get to the next level where you know it's not doable. And then you might watch something on YouTube and you see how somebody's playing that and you say, perhaps I can do that. And then they try again. So it's always an external trigger normally that makes you re-engage. But
Yeah.
nothing
Sometimes
formalized.
it's a mix of external and internal motivations to come back. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone has a question?
I have a question.
Please do.
Regarding, I remember when you were bringing about some, one of your slides with the whole robotics, kind of like with the VR headset, it was like kind of like a dock off, kind of something like that. Was that using any like neural interfaces by any chance?
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Was it using any robotics applications with VR and AR?
Or the one where you could see the people with a tail?
Yeah, that.
No, not that I'm aware of. I would have to look in the original publication. Let me see. So this is where I will put the publication in the chat. So should check this paper, please. It should talk how it works. But as far as I know, it's not using any neural interface.
What was like the whole point of the tail? Was it like kind of like the whole use of it?
The idea was like to augment the body and to be able to give new experience to players. And if I remember correctly, in that paper, they explored how this tail can be used to provide you extra balance so that you can do more difficult physical tasks and the tail keeps you in balance. And they also explored how the tail could be used to get you off balance.
Oh, so like it could be used for like rehabilitation or balance or like pathological gaits?
Potentially, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a really cool project. Fortunately, I was not part of it, but it's really nice to illustrate what you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting project. I remember from SIGGRAPH, they were talking about how they get inspiration from animals and how they use their tails while they are moving to balance their bodies.
But did they show the tail at SIGGRAPH?
I think I wasn't there, so I saw the demo on videos. Yeah, some people, they tried it here from the lab as well.
Oh, cool. I haven't tried that one, but it's yeah, awesome idea. I think you can't use it like monkeys for climbing. That would be really awesome. But yeah.
Anyone has any other questions from the audience? I have another question. So we talked about the re-engagement and how it's usually a little bit difficult to measure. I wanted to ask when. So you said when we have the flow, which is the state of like losing time, and people are playing for however long it takes. When is it, you think, from your point of view, to say, okay, we shouldn't design games that infinitely take time, and say, okay, you had enough time, now go back to real work or something like? I don't know if that's something you explored, or you think it's worth exploring, or you think, I mean, from a game developer point of view, they want more people to use it and they will make more revenue. But when is human well-being is part of this equation? I don't know.
I think it's a very, very important question. I have my own opinions about that. I haven't looked into that, let's say, scientifically speaking.
Yeah.
I have a few games that I've played myself where I have this feeling and the loss of time or transformation of time. And I from personal experience, I definitely agree it's dangerous um, because you forget about other things that you need to do. So I don't know. If there's anyone in the audience, for me it was, for example, Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. That was a game where very often like started playing it and then I looked at, oh, it's already 2 a.m. But I still want to solve that one last riddle, you know? I think it's one really good example on how to engage people and to get them into the storyline and make them forget about everything else. I think it's a societal discussion that needs to take place there. So obviously, for a functioning society, you don't want to have people immersed in virtual experiences all the time, because then the society is not functioning. And as you said correctly, like as a game design studio, you actually would like to create a game that makes people come back and play it and play it and play it all the time, because that increases your revenue. Yeah, I don't know.
And the same with social media and few other like technologies. And when I talk to people who are not experienced in VR, they think, oh, why do I want to immerse myself in VR and forget about the real world and these kind of things? I guess it's a challenging question, trying to think about when designing a game or an experience, how to take into account.
Yeah, I think what is important and what we do here in Christchurch in the HIT Lab as part of the Applied Immersive Gaming Initiative, we are looking not at entertainment games. So very often this transformation of time, loss of time, you have that with entertainment games. We specifically look into applied immersive games, so games that can be used for training people, for helping people to and for helping them, for example, to rehabilitate or these kind of things. So then what you would like to do with engagement is to create an environment where people would like to be trained or like to learn things. So then it's not really about the transformation of time. It can be an aspect of it because it might make people come back and really spend time in there. But then from a design perspective, you know what is really useful and how much time is needed in order to, for example, work on your gait and walk better again. So you can basically limit it and you can design it in such a way that it's still a great experience and that people are engaged using it because it's beneficial for them. But you can limit the time because you know what amount of time is necessary or what kind of outcome you would like to achieve. Whereas within entertainment games, it's very often it's a spare time activity. So it's something that you do in your spare time.
Yeah.
But there's no limit to it, no natural limit, or no good limit to it, let's say. That's different if you use games for a purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Anyone else has any questions? Otherwise, we appreciate all the time you spend in preparing this and sharing it with us. Thank you again for everything. And
Welcome.
if anyone has any questions, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, obviously you can do it all the time. I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. Yeah.